My name's Guy Maynard. I'm a retired editor. I've been retired for about 12 years. My last paying job of any substance was as editor of the University of Oregon's magazine, Oregon Quarterly, which I was very proud of the work we did there. I grew up in Massachusetts till I was 13, moved to Illinois for my high school years, and then went back to Boston for college. But I didn't graduate from college until my mid-30s. When I first went to college, the events that take place and the risk of being ridiculous sort of led me in a very different direction from focusing on school. I started writing letters to the editor when I was 12. I wrote my first letter to the editor at 12, and it was a letter supporting Barry Goldwater. And then when I was in high school, I wrote a letter after Martin Luther King had been killed. I switched teams by then, and I wrote a letter about what a tragic event that was for our country. But I always wrote, but I sort of lacked discipline. In college even, I wrote. One of my ways of earning money for marijuana was to write papers for people. But I never had any discipline, or I just thought of myself that somehow I had this aptitude to write. So I dropped out of school after 2 years, and then had the adventures that are described in the trilogy, and then eventually ended up in Eugene, Oregon, worked as a carpenter for about 8 years. And then, the economy got really bad, and I was going through a lot of it was a challenging period in my life, and my mother had died, so I inherited a little bit of money, was able to go back to school and got a degree in journalism, and thought that if I can use this aptitude for writing, I need discipline. I need to do it in a focused way. So I did that. And then from there I worked on a community newspaper for a weekly for a year. That was one of the hardest jobs I ever did. And then worked for almost 10 years doing working with technical journals. Then this Oregon Quarterly job came up, and that was, it was like my dream job, and I didn't really think I would ever get it, but I did. And through that, I had contact with a lot of really good writers, a lot of good Oregon writers, Barry Lopez and Ellie Waterston and Robin Cody, and I had a very determined assistant editor who studied creative writing and was a good creative writer, and she sort of coerced me into joining a writing group, and that's when I started. What am I going to write? So I started telling the story, which was the story of sort of a pivotal period of my life in my late teens, early 20s, and just started doing chapters, and that grew into The Risk of Being Ridiculous, and I never really intended to write the rest of it, but Risk of Being Ridiculous sort of ends. There's some ambiguity in how it ends, like most stories in life, so after I retired, I just started sort of plugging away on what happens after that. When I first started writing it, the first thing I called it was fictionalized memoir. And I call it that because I wanted it to be true. I wanted it to be real. That was, part of my motivation for writing it is that period. So the period is roughly the end of 1969 through the middle of 1972. It's so been sort of trivialized, or it's either glorified or deified or whatever, in popular culture. And I wanted to tell the real story about it. I lived in a world of fact-checking, and that something you called nonfiction was not, that it was facts. And there was something about memoir that sort of got into haziness in terms of how, that just kind of bothered me. And so as someone who is believed that nonfiction should really be nonfiction, I knew that I had to recreate characters and recreate scenes, and to tell the story in the real way, even though it was true. I mean, it was true, but not every detail is as it was, and it couldn't have been, and still had the sort of the spirit and the detail that I wanted. So that was my compromise, was to call it fictionalized memoir, It's autobiographical novel, or and I think I probably could have passed as a memoir, and maybe it would have been more commercially viable if I had done that. But I never felt comfortable having it sit in a nonfiction section of a bookstore, but it is true. I mean, so it is based on the real events in my life. The Risk of Being Ridiculous takes place in a 6-week period at the very end of 1969. Beginning of 1970, and it was a pivotal time in my life in terms of sort of the two kind of threads of ridiculousness that the character pursues is our love, with a specific woman, and trying to change the world. And that in that period, that 6-week period, there were sort of major turning points in both of those. His relationship both to this woman and to the movement that was then the anti-war movement, the anti-racist movement. It seemed that period of time seemed to capture that particular moment of just this a major shift in my life, in the life of the character. The original version of that was published in 2010, and it sat, and I was still working, and I wrote it, in evenings and weekends, and then in retirement, I had more time to think, and I had a person from my writing group who had said that when at the end of reading the last chapter of The Risk of Being Ridiculous, said, "Is that it?" And that was sort of still in the back of my mind that someday I want to answer that question, and so that's why I proceeded with the second one. And my original intention of the second was to only have 2 books. But then it ended up, I sort of got to a point where I was going to have 2 parts of a second book. And I was talking with my current publisher then about this, and he thought it was sort of absurd to have a 2-part book and a 2-part series with the second book being 2 different parts. So at that point we decided to make it a trilogy, and it turned out that the second book is the shortest of the 3, but it does really connect the first and the third. And then the third was the second book is about a period of about 13 months, and the subtitle is Trial a Long Year from Here to There, and it took place over a long period of time and in various locations, and it was really this kind of, where do we go next? And both, sort of emotionally, politically, and geographically. And then, so the third book is where we end up, and it tells a story of that leads us to Oregon, and so the third book is about our time in Oregon, and there was enough in that to write 500 pages, or at least I thought so. I think the voice does mature through the 3 books, and I think for 2 reasons. One, I think that there is maturity in Ben. That Ben, the character, he's my character in the 3 books, that he does mature through this, even though he's still only 22 when the series ends. There is a maturity and sort of facing some of the events of the first book and the consequences of the second book lead to a maturity, but still, being very young. And I think also as a writer, I think I learned from each of the books, and I learned that my writing style, I was maybe more conscious. The first book was, none of it was. There was a lot of revision. None of it was stream of consciousness, but the first one was more raw, and I think I spent more time polishing. And maybe I just become more polished of a writer for the second and third. But I think in some ways, and some people, they think the first book is the hardest because the character is intense and unlikable in some ways, the main character. But I think that's real. I tried to be as real about that character as I could. And I think what part of the lesson of the 3 books, part of the lesson of that period of my life, is that it's better to fight the good fight and lose and learn from it than to give up.